8.3 million people on an island surrounded by water, and the water is rising. This is 2012, Hurricane Sandy. 17% of the city underwater, 43 dead, 65 billion in damage. That was just the preview. New York is not one island. It is 5 boroughs, surrounded and divided by water. 520 miles of coastline, most of it less than 2 feet above sea level. 472 subway stations, most of them underground, some of them below sea level. The entire system, built in 1904, never designed for what is coming. Sandy put water in 54 subway stations, 6 days offline. The surge hit 14 feet in some areas. Damage that took $3 billion and 6 years to repair. Sea levels around New York will rise 15 to 30 inches by 2050. The storms that used to happen once a century will happen every 5 years. Red Hook, Brooklyn, 40,000 people at sea level. No barrier, no protection. During Sandy, it flooded in 30 minutes. The residents knew it was coming. They had nowhere to go. Staten Island, 23 people killed by Sandy, more than any other borough. By 2026, the federal government is paying people to leave. Some take the money, most do not. New York's water mains average 90 years old. The subway tunnels are older than the airplane. The city must adapt its infrastructure to climate, while that infrastructure is already failing. 400,000 New Yorkers live in the 100-year flood zone, 70% of them low income. The people with the least resources live closest to the water. The city estimates it needs $52 billion to protect against future storms. Congress has approved 20. The gap is $32 billion, and every year, without action, the cost grows. 2028, the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project completed. A new elevated park along the East River doubles as a flood barrier. 2.5 miles, $750 million, the first piece of the wall. The MTA installs flood barriers at every vulnerable subway entrance. Retractable steel doors, inflatable plugs for tunnel mouths, a system that can seal the entire subway in 4 hours. It costs $2 billion. By 2027, flood insurance premiums in coastal New York double, then triple. In some flood zone neighborhoods, insurance becomes unaffordable. The market begins to price what the maps already know. New York launches its managed buyout program, purchasing the most vulnerable homes, demolishing them, returning land to open space. By 2029, 1,000 homes gone. The city choosing who leaves, one address at a time. The Big U, 10 miles of flood protection, wrapping around the bottom of Manhattan. Parks on the surface, concrete and steel underneath. Designed to hold against a Category 2 storm, but the models are already showing Category 3.
The real estate market begins to split. New construction builds higher. Flood-resilient architecture becomes a luxury feature. In flood zones, prices drop. The city stratifies, not just by wealth, but by elevation.
2031, the first major storm since Sandy. The new barriers hold in the protected zones. Outside them, it floods. The wall reveals exactly who the city decided to protect and who it did not. The Rockaway Peninsula, 100,000 people on a strip of land 2 miles wide between the ocean and the bay. It flooded in 2012. By 2032, it floods 3 times a year, just from high tides. Every flood barrier protects some neighborhoods and not others. Every dollar spent is a political choice. By 2030, climate adaptation in New York is not an engineering problem, it is a power problem. People stay because this is home, because the buyout price doesn't buy anything else in New York, because the community took 40 years to build, because living is not adaptation, it is erasure. The most ambitious proposal, a storm surge barrier across the harbor, a retractable gate at the Verrazano Narrows, $119 billion. Protect everything inside, or protect nothing outside the smaller barriers. The debate will last a decade. New York launches its Sponge City program, green roofs, bioswales, retention ponds. The city learning to absorb water instead of fighting it. 1,000 projects. Still not enough for a major storm, but the philosophy has changed. 2035. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, redesigned as a model for flood-resilient industry. Every building elevated, every ground floor designed to flood and recover. The new rule for coastal New York: build for the water, not against it. The MTA completes Phase 2 of subway flood protection. Elevated platforms, flood reservoirs built into station basins, real-time water monitoring at every station. The system that failed in 2012 can now seal itself in under 2 hours. Coney Island, 60,000 people. The city has not decided whether to protect it or retreat. Every year without a decision is a decision. The residents are waiting for an answer that may never come. 2038. Sea level around New York, 8 inches above the year 2000 baseline. Storm drains backing up during normal rain. King tides flooding streets in Lower Manhattan 3 times a year. The new normal arriving ahead of schedule. By 2038, Lower Manhattan is 85% protected. The outer borough coastlines, 20% or less. The pattern is clear. The city is protecting its tax base first, its people second. By 2037, New York is receiving climate migrants. From Miami, from Houston, from the Carolina coast. They come for higher ground. They come for the infrastructure. They come because New York, at least, is fighting back. October 2041. Category 3, direct hit on New York Harbor. Storm surge of 12 feet. The Big U holds. The East Side barrier holds. The subway stays dry. Inside the protected zone, the streets are wet, not flooded. Outside the barriers, the 2041 storm is catastrophic. Red Hook, Rockaway, parts of the Bronx waterfront. The same surge that the protected zones survived floods these neighborhoods again. Same city, different outcome, decided by a line on a map. 2042. Congress approves $40 billion. The New York Climate Infrastructure Act. Outer Borough flood protection. Subway complete overhaul. The harbor barrier study funded. The 2041 storm, finally forcing the action that 20 years of planning could not. By 2042, flood insurance in high-risk zones costs $8,000 a year. For families making $40,000, it is impossible. They leave not because of flooding, because of paperwork, because of math. The insurance market doing what the water has not yet done. The Bronx waterfront, one of the most polluted and neglected in the city, gets its barrier. A decade after Manhattan, 15 years of community organizing. The protection arriving, late, but arriving. New York is not losing people, it is rearranging them. Coastal zones thinning, higher ground densifying. The city reorganizing itself around a new geography, not of neighborhoods, but of elevation. 2044, Congress approves the New York Harbor Storm Surge Barrier, the most expensive infrastructure project in American history. $119 billion. A retractable gate across the Verrazano Narrows. Completion 2054, if the schedule holds. New luxury buildings in New York are engineered for flooding from the ground up. Mechanical systems on the roof, sacrificial lower floors, residences starting at floor 6. Flood resilience, a luxury feature available to those who can afford the view. 2044, 15 inches above the 2000 baseline. The subway floods 8 times this year, not from storms, from rain. 140 locations where streets flood during normal weather. The infrastructure built for the last century, fighting the conditions of this one. 2048. The harbour barrier, 2 years from completion. The gate sections rising from the water, visible from Staten Island, from Brooklyn, from Lower Manhattan. The most expensive structure ever built in New York, and the most necessary. 2046. Coney Island gets its answer after 10 years of waiting. A seawall, an elevated boardwalk, protection rated for Category 3 storms. The decision that should have been made in 2032, made in 2046. 4 floods too late. New York reinvents its relationship with water. The waterfront no longer fights the harbour, it accommodates it. Elevated parks, flexible infrastructure, buildings designed to absorb a surge and recover. The city and the water learning to coexist. The subway that flooded in 2012 is unrecognizable by 2048. $20 billion over 20 years. Elevated platforms, flood reservoirs, automated sealing. The system can close itself in 90 minutes. It has been tested 9 times. A 2047 city report finds the residents displaced from flood zones since 2026 are 82% non-white. The residents who moved into protected high ground neighborhoods are 71% white. The flood did not create this pattern. The response to it did. September 2050. Category 2. The harbor barrier closes for the first time. The gates take 40 minutes to seal. Storm surge of 9 feet. Stops at the barrier. Inside the harbor, the water is calm. 8 million people behind that gate. It holds. The barrier stops the ocean. It does not stop the rain. During the 2050 storm, neighborhoods flood from rainfall alone. The drainage system, designed in 1950, cannot handle what the sky delivers in 2050. The barrier was the solution to one problem. 2050, 8.6 million people. $180 billion spent since 2012. 4.2 billion per year just to manage the water. New York is the most expensive city in the world to keep dry, and it remains 8.6 million people who would not leave. 50,000 homes purchased and demolished since 2026. The neighborhoods gone, not destroyed by a storm, removed by decision. The communities that were there scattered. The land returned to marsh, exactly as it was before the city built on it. The unexpected winner of New York's climate adaptation, the Bronx. Highest average elevation of any borough, less flood risk, lower historic investment, meaning lower starting prices. By 2050, the most desirable borough for people who understand the maps. By 2050, New York can survive a direct Category 3 hurricane within the barrier system. The subway stays functional at reduced service. Lower Manhattan stays dry. A storm that would have caused $65 billion in damage in 2012 causes $2 billion. The investment working. 2050, sea level 22 inches above the year 2000 baseline. The harbour barrier, commissioned for a 22-inch rise, now at its design parameter. In the engineering offices, the plans for Phase 2 already on the table. The communities displaced from New York's flood zones did not disappear. They rebuilt. In Newark, in the Bronx, in parts of Queens that stayed affordable. The culture moved. The neighborhood gone. The people still here. $250 billion to adapt one city, to buy it another generation. The economists say, without the investment, cumulative flood damage by 2050 would have exceeded $400 billion. Cheaper to build the wall than pay the damage. New York 2050 is not the New York of 2026. Same name, same skyline. $250 billion later. The flood zones emptied, the protected core densified, the outer boroughs transformed or abandoned. A different city wearing a familiar face. 22 inches above where it started. $250 billion spent. 50,000 homes gone. 8.6 million people who decided this island was worth it. Not saved, managed for now. Next on Cities Forward, Phoenix. 5 million people in the desert. The hottest major city in America. The water is running out. The heat is already killing people. Can anyone actually live there in 2050?